The alarm rang across Nexus Prime Station at exactly 0800 hours. Jake Morrison rolled out of his narrow bunk and hit the cold metal floor with his bare feet. Around him, 36 other cadets from 12 different alien species were doing the same thing. Some floated in the air using natural abilities. Others moved on multiple legs or slithered across the floor. Jake just walked on 2 feet like humans always had. The Galactic Military Academy was the most important training facility in known space. Every species that wanted to join the Galactic Defense Force had to send their best young people here. Jake was 22 years old and the only human in his class. Earth had joined the galactic community just 5 years ago, and this was humanity's first chance to prove they belonged among the stars. Commander Vexithara stood at the front of the classroom when the cadets filed in. She was tall and thin with skin that looked like blue crystal. Her people, the Zephyrians, had been part of the galaxy for over 3,000 years. They were known for their calm thinking and perfect military tactics. When she spoke, her voice sounded like wind chimes in a gentle breeze. "Today we begin your final examination," she said. Her crystal-like fingers touched the control pad on her desk. The lights dimmed and a holographic display appeared in the air above their heads. "You have been learning tactical engineering for 6 months. Now you must prove what you have learned." Jake sat in the back row as usual. The other cadets often forgot he was there. They came from species that had been fighting wars across the galaxy for thousands of years. Their ancestors had built weapons that could destroy planets and shields that could stop entire fleets. What could one human contribute to such a group? The hologram showed a simple room with basic furniture: desks, chairs, wall panels, and nothing else. Commander Vexithara gestured toward the display. "Each of you will be assigned an identical room. You will have 8 hours to build a weapon using only the materials you find there. You may not bring any tools or equipment from outside. You may not ask for help from other cadets. The weapon you create must be functional and demonstrate the tactical principles we have studied." A cadet named Karthek raised one of his 4 arms. He was a raptoid, a species that looked like giant lizards that walked upright. His people were natural warriors who had conquered half their home galaxy before joining the Galactic Defense Force. "Commander," Karthek said in his deep, growling voice, "what defines a weapon? Must it be energy-based, projectile, chemical?" "Any device designed to cause damage to an enemy," Commander Vexithara replied. "The method is your choice." Another cadet spoke up. This was Zilandra from the Photonic Collective. Her body was made of pure light energy held together in a humanoid shape. Her people could manipulate electromagnetic radiation with their thoughts. "Are there restrictions on the type of damage?" she asked. "Physical? Energy? Psychological?" "No restrictions," the commander said. "Your weapon must simply be effective against a military target." Jake listened to the questions and felt his stomach tighten. These aliens had grown up with technology that seemed like magic to human eyes. Karthek's people had developed gravity manipulation weapons 10,000 years ago. Zilandra's species could build lasers that cut through starship hulls like paper. What could he possibly create that would impress anyone? The commander dismissed them to their individual testing rooms. Jake followed the others down a long corridor lined with identical doors. Each door had a number and a cadet's name written in Galactic Standard script. Jake found his room at the end of the hall. Inside, the room looked exactly like the hologram. 4 metal desks arranged in a square, 16 chairs with plastic seats and metal legs, wall panels made of some kind of composite material, a few light fixtures hanging from the ceiling. Nothing that looked remotely like weapon materials to Jake's eyes. He could hear sounds from the other rooms through the thin walls. Humming energy, crackling electricity, the whine of high-frequency vibrations. His fellow cadets were already working on their creations. Jake sat in one of the chairs and put his head in his hands. Growing up on Earth, Jake had always been good at solving problems. His father was a construction worker who taught him how to look at any structure and understand how it was built. His mother was an engineer who showed him how to calculate stress and load distribution. But those skills seemed useless here among aliens who could reshape matter with their minds. Jake stood up and walked to the nearest desk. It was solid metal with a smooth surface. Heavy, maybe 60 pounds. The legs were welded to the frame with what looked like standard fusion joints. He ran his hands along the edges, feeling for weak points or design flaws. The desk was well made but not perfect. The corner joints had small gaps where the metal didn't quite meet. The surface had tiny scratches that showed the grain of the metal underneath. Most importantly, the legs were attached at points that created natural stress concentrations. Jake moved to the next desk, then the next. Each one was identical. Mass-produced furniture designed to be functional but not artistic. The chairs were even simpler. Lightweight metal frames with plastic seats that clipped into place. Through the walls, Jake could hear his classmates making progress. Something exploded with a sharp bang in Karthek's room. In another room, a high-pitched whine grew louder and louder before suddenly stopping. Jake was running out of time and had no idea what to do. He sat on the floor and closed his eyes, trying to think like his parents had taught him. What would a construction worker see in this room? What would an engineer calculate? The answer came to him slowly, like sunrise creeping over a mountain. These aliens were thinking like weapons designers. They were trying to build something new from scratch. But Jake had grown up around people who worked with their hands. They knew that sometimes the best tool was the one you made by breaking something else. 4 hours passed in the testing chambers. Jake could hear the sounds of progress from every room except his own. In the chamber to his left, Karthek had created something that made deep thumping sounds every few minutes, like a massive heartbeat. Each thump shook the walls and made dust fall from the ceiling fixtures. To Jake's right, Zilandra was working with light and energy. Bright flashes leaked under her door, followed by the smell of burned metal. Whatever she was building, it was hot enough to melt the wall panels. Jake pressed his ear to the wall and heard the steady hum of controlled electromagnetic energy. Down the hall, other cadets were making their own progress. Nixara from the Hive Worlds had filled her room with a buzzing sound like a million angry insects. Her people could control swarms of tiny machines with their minds. She was probably building something that could take apart an enemy piece by piece. Veltar from the Crystal Dominion was making musical sounds, high and low tones that seemed to follow complex patterns. His species could grow crystal structures that vibrated at specific frequencies. Jake had seen them shatter stone with nothing but sound during their physics demonstrations. Jake sat in the middle of his unchanged room and felt like a failure. Every other cadet was using abilities that their species had developed over thousands of years. He was just a human with basic engineering knowledge and hands that couldn't manipulate energy or grow crystals or control gravity. He walked to the first desk again and sat down heavily. The chair squeaked under his weight. Such a simple sound, but it reminded him of his grandfather's workshop back on Earth. His grandfather had been a mechanic who could fix anything with wheels or an engine. He used to say that every machine talked to you if you knew how to listen. Jake listened to the desk. He pressed down on different parts of the surface and heard how the metal responded. He pushed on the legs and felt how they flexed under pressure. Slowly, he began to understand what he was hearing. The desk was strong, but only when used as intended. It could support weight from above, but it wasn't designed for sideways forces. The legs were welded to the frame at right angles, which made them vulnerable to twisting motions. The surface was thick and solid, but the support structure underneath had spaces that could be pressure points. Jake stood up and grabbed the edge of the desk with both hands. He lifted one side and felt the weight distribution change. The desk wanted to stay balanced, but Jake could feel the stress building in the joints where the legs connected to the frame. In Karthek's room, something exploded again. This time, the sound was followed by a roar of satisfaction. The Raptoid had clearly succeeded in building something powerful. Jake tried not to think about what kind of weapon could make the walls shake like that. Jake set the desk back down and moved to examine the chairs. They were lighter and more fragile than the desks. The metal frames were thin tubing bent into shape and welded at the joints. The plastic seats were designed to flex slightly under weight, which made them comfortable but also weak. He picked up one chair and tested its balance. The front legs were slightly shorter than the back legs, which meant the chair naturally wanted to tip forward. The plastic seat was held in place by 4 small clips that could probably be removed if he applied the right kind of pressure. The wall panels were different from both the desks and chairs. They were made of some kind of composite material that felt like a cross between metal and plastic. They were lightweight but rigid, designed to provide privacy and sound dampening rather than structural support. Jake ran his fingers along the edges of one panel. It was attached to the wall with simple brackets that could probably be removed. The panel itself had a smooth outer surface, but felt hollow inside. He tapped it gently and heard the echo of an empty space. Through the walls, Jake could hear that some of his classmates were finishing their projects. The sounds were getting more organized and purposeful. Zelandra's energy humming had settled into a steady rhythm. Karthek's impacts were coming at regular intervals. Whatever they had built, they were now testing it. Jake looked around his room and tried to see it through different eyes, not as furniture but as raw materials. Not as objects designed for sitting and writing, but as metal and plastic that could be reshaped into something else. His grandfather used to say that the best mechanics weren't the ones who built things from scratch. The best mechanics were the ones who could look at something broken and see what it could become. They could take apart a dead engine and use the pieces to build something completely different. Jake walked to the center of the room and looked at everything together. 4 heavy desks with solid surfaces and vulnerable joints, 16 lightweight chairs with flexible components, wall panels that could be removed and repurposed, and 8 hours to turn it all into something that could be called a weapon. But what kind of weapon? His classmates were building things that could destroy enemies from a distance. Energy weapons, projectile weapons, sound weapons, gravity weapons, all designed to kill quickly and efficiently from as far away as possible. Jake thought about human history and the weapons his species had developed. Swords and spears for close combat, bows and guns for distance fighting, tanks and aircraft for overwhelming force. But humans had also developed something else that most alien species seemed to have forgotten. Humans had learned to defend themselves. The thought hit Jake like electricity. Every other cadet was thinking about offense. How to attack, how to destroy, how to kill. But Commander Vexithara had only said they needed to build a weapon that could cause damage to an enemy. She hadn't said it had to be designed primarily for attack. Jake looked at the desks again, but this time he saw something different. He saw weight and mass and structural integrity. He saw something that could absorb impact and distribute force. He saw something that could protect a person while they got close enough to fight back. He also saw something that could be broken in, just the right way to become dangerous. Jake grabbed the nearest desk with both hands and lifted it slightly off the floor. He could feel the stress building in the leg joints. A little more pressure in the right direction, and those joints would fail. When they failed, they wouldn't break cleanly. The metal would tear and twist, creating sharp edges and jagged points. For the first time in 4 hours, Jake smiled. He had found his weapon. It just wasn't the kind of weapon anyone else would think to build. Jake positioned himself next to the first desk and took a deep breath. What he was about to do would either work perfectly or leave him with a room full of useless scrap metal. There would be no second chances and no way to undo his choice once he committed to it. He gripped the desk firmly with both hands, fingers spread wide for maximum control. The metal surface felt cold and solid under his palms. Jake had calculated the stress points in his head, but theory and practice were two different things. His grandfather always said that metal had a mind of its own, and you had to work with it, not against it. From the other testing rooms came the sounds of final preparations. Karthek was doing something that created rhythmic pounding, like he was testing the power of his creation. Zelandra's energy weapon was cycling through what sounded like different power settings, each one creating a different pitch and intensity of humming. Jake blocked out the distractions and focused on the desk in front of him. He positioned his left foot firmly on the floor and raised his right knee to waist height. The plan was simple in concept but would require precise execution. Too little force and the desk would just bend without breaking. Too much force in the wrong direction and it would collapse into a useless pile. He pulled up on the desk with his arms while driving his knee into the junction where the leg met the frame. The metal resisted at first, then gave way with a sharp crack that echoed through the room. But it wasn't the clean break Jake had hoped for. The desk was damaged but still mostly intact. Jake repositioned himself and tried again. This time he focused all his force on a single weak point. He pulled with his arms, pushed with his knee, and twisted with his whole body. The metal screamed in protest, then suddenly gave way with a sound like thunder. The desk didn't just break, it shattered. The leg tore free from the frame in a shower of metal fragments. The surface cracked along lines of stress that Jake hadn't even known were there. One corner collapsed completely, sending chair parts flying across the room. The sound was so loud that Jake's ears rang for several seconds afterward. When the dust settled, Jake looked at what he had created. It was chaos. Twisted metal, sharp edges, and bent pieces scattered across the floor. To anyone watching, it would look like he had simply destroyed Academy property in a fit of frustration. But Jake saw something different. He saw exactly what he had planned. The main surface of the desk had cracked but remained mostly intact. It formed a rough rectangle about 3 feet by 2 feet, thick enough to stop most projectiles or energy blasts. The edges where it had broken were jagged and sharp, perfect for catching or deflecting incoming attacks. The leg that had torn free was now a twisted piece of metal about 2 feet long. One end was relatively smooth where it had been attached to the frame. The other end was a mass of sharp points and torn metal that could punch through armor or slash through flesh. Jake picked up the main piece and tested its weight. It was heavy enough to absorb impact, but light enough for him to carry and maneuver. The surface had natural grip points where the metal had bent and twisted. Most importantly, it felt balanced in his hands, like it belonged there. Through the wall, Jake heard Veltar testing his sonic weapon. The crystal-based sounds were getting more complex and powerful. Something in Nixara's room was buzzing so loudly that Jake could feel vibrations in the floor. His classmates were putting the finishing touches on weapons that could probably level buildings. Jake set the broken desk piece aside and examined the other debris. The chairs had been damaged in the explosion, but some of their parts were still useful. The metal tubing could be straightened and sharpened into spikes. The plastic seats could be broken into sharp fragments that would be difficult to see coming in a fight. But Jake's real focus was on the wall panels. He had noticed earlier that they were held in place with simple brackets. Now he could see that the explosion had loosened several of them. Jake worked quickly to remove 2 panels completely. The panels were lighter than the desk surface but just as strong. They were also the right size and shape to be attached to the main piece as extensions or reinforcements. Jake used fragments of chair metal to create connecting points between the panels and the desk surface. What emerged from his work was something that no military academy in the galaxy had ever seen before. It was roughly shield-shaped but covered in sharp edges and projecting spikes. The surface was designed to catch and deflect attacks, while the edges could cut or stab anyone who got too close. But Jake wasn't finished yet. He had noticed something about the way the desk had broken that gave him an idea. The metal had fractured along predictable lines of stress. If he applied force in the right way, he could control how it broke. More importantly, he could make it break in a way that would be useful in combat. Jake took the twisted leg piece and examined its structure. It was still mostly intact, but he could see stress fractures running along its length. With the right application of force, he could split it into multiple sharp fragments while keeping them connected at the base. He positioned the leg piece against the floor and stepped on it with his full weight while twisting. The metal groaned and began to separate along the stress lines. But instead of breaking completely, the pieces remained connected by thin strips of metal that acted like hinges. The result was something that looked like a metal flower with razor-sharp petals. When Jake held it by the smooth end, he could make the sharp pieces spread out or fold together by rotating his wrist. It was part weapon and part tool, designed to adapt to whatever situation he might face. Jake stepped back and looked at his creations. In less than an hour, he had turned 4 desks and 16 chairs into something that could protect him and hurt his enemies. But more than that, he had created something that reflected the way humans thought about fighting. Other species built weapons designed to kill from a distance. Humans built weapons designed to keep them alive while they got close enough to finish the fight. Other species separated offense and defense into different categories. Humans understood that the best defense was often a good offense, and the Best offense sometimes looked like defense. The sounds from the other testing rooms were quieting down. His classmates were finishing their projects and preparing for the demonstration phase. Jake used the remaining time to test his creations and make small adjustments. The shield-like piece could be held comfortably in his left hand, leaving his right hand free to use the spiked weapon. The weight was distributed properly to avoid fatigue during extended combat. The sharp edges were positioned to deflect attacks toward his enemies rather than back at himself. Most importantly, both pieces felt natural in his hands. They weren't elegant or sophisticated like the energy weapons his classmates had built. They were crude and brutal and practical. They looked like something a primitive human might have made from scraps, which was exactly what they were, and exactly what Jake had intended. The testing time ended with a soft chime that echoed through all the chambers. Jake heard his classmates moving around in their rooms, gathering their creations and preparing for the demonstration phase. He looked at his own work and felt a mixture of pride and nervousness. The shield-like piece had evolved during his final adjustments. What had started as a broken desk surface was now something that looked almost organic. The metal had natural curves where it had bent under stress. The sharp edges followed lines that seemed random, but were actually calculated for maximum effectiveness. It was ugly by most standards, but Jake thought it was beautiful in its own brutal way. The spiked weapon had also changed as he worked with it. The metal petals could now be locked into different positions depending on what Jake needed. Spread wide, they formed a defensive barrier that could catch swords or spears. Folded together, they created a single sharp point that could punch through armor. Partially extended, they became a series of cutting edges that could slash in multiple directions with one swing. Commander Vexithara's voice came through the communication system built into each room. Her crystal-clear tones carried the authority of 3,000 years of military tradition. Cadets, report to the main demonstration chamber. Bring your creations and prepare to explain their function and tactical applications. You will be evaluated on creativity, effectiveness, and adherence to established military principles. Jake heard doors opening throughout the corridor. His classmates were emerging from their testing chambers with their weapons. Through his own door, Jake could hear excited conversations in multiple alien languages. Everyone seemed pleased with what they had accomplished. Jake picked up his two pieces and tested their weight one more time. The shield felt solid and reliable in his left hand. The spiked weapon balanced perfectly in his right. Together, they represented everything he understood about human approaches to conflict. He opened his door and stepped into the corridor. The sight that greeted him was impressive and intimidating in equal measure. Karthek stood near his doorway holding what looked like a warhammer made of compressed gravity. The head of the weapon bent light around itself in strange patterns. When Karthek moved it, Jake could feel the air pressure change throughout the hallway. This was something that could crush starship hulls with a single blow. Zilandra floated next to her creation, which appeared to be a rifle made of pure, coherent light. The weapon had no physical components that Jake could see, yet it hummed with contained energy that made his skin tingle from 20 feet away. She had somehow convinced photons to hold a solid shape and focus into a beam that could probably cut through a mountain. Nixara carried a small metal sphere that buzzed with the sound of countless tiny machines. As Jake watched, the sphere split open to reveal a swarm of microscopic robots that moved in perfect formation. They could probably disassemble an enemy at the molecular level while building new weapons from the leftover atoms. Veltar had grown a crystal formation that resonated with multiple harmonic frequencies simultaneously. The sound it made was beautiful and terrifying. Jake had seen demonstrations of sonic weapons before, but nothing that could apparently produce sound waves capable of shattering matter at the quantum level. Other cadets displayed equally impressive creations. Energy weapons that could exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. Projectile weapons that fired rounds that could change direction after being shot. Chemical weapons that could adapt their molecular structure to defeat any known armor. Jake looked at his crude metal constructs and wondered if he had completely misunderstood the assignment. His weapons looked like something a savage might make from battlefield scrap. They had no energy signatures, no exotic physics, no technological sophistication at all. The demonstration chamber was a large circular room with a raised platform in the center. Commander Vexithara stood on the platform next to a series of testing targets. Some were simple metal plates for testing penetration. Others were energy fields for testing exotic effects. A few were holographic projections designed to simulate living enemies. Each cadet will demonstrate their weapons' capabilities and explain the tactical thinking behind their design, the commander announced. We will begin with Cadet Karthek and proceed in alphabetical order by species designation. Jake realized that meant he would go last. Humans were the newest members of the galactic community, so Earth fell at the end of most official lists. He would have to watch 36 demonstrations of advanced alien weapons technology before showing his broken furniture. Karthek stepped onto the platform and hefted his gravity hammer. He explained how his people had learned to compress gravitational fields into portable weapons thousands of years ago. The hammer could create localized gravity wells that would crush any target, regardless of size or composition. He demonstrated by activating the weapon near a metal testing plate. The plate didn't just bend or break. It collapsed into itself until it formed a sphere of compressed matter smaller than Jake's fist. The original plate had been 3 feet square and 2 inches thick. Now it was a marble of super dense metal that probably weighed as much as a small vehicle. Zilandra followed with her light rifle. She explained the principles of photonic manipulation and coherent energy focusing. Her people had mastered these techniques long before most species had developed fire. The rifle could adjust its frequency to overcome any known defensive measure. Her demonstration cut through a series of increasingly difficult targets. Metal plates, energy barriers, even a holographic simulation of advanced armor. The light beam passed through everything as if it wasn't there, leaving perfectly circular holes with edges so smooth they looked polished. One by one, Jake's classmates demonstrated weapons that defied his understanding of physics. Each presentation was a masterpiece of advanced technology and refined tactical thinking. These weren't just weapons. They were works of art that happened to be capable of incredible destruction. Jake felt his confidence ebbing with each demonstration. His shield and spiked weapon seemed more primitive with every passing minute. When it came time for species starting with letters near the end of the alphabet, Jake was seriously considering withdrawing from the examination entirely. Then something interesting happened. Commander Vexthera began asking more detailed questions about the weapons being demonstrated. She wanted to know about energy consumption rates, maintenance requirements, and tactical limitations. Jake started paying closer attention to the answers. Karthek's gravity hammer required a power source that would drain a starship's reactor after 30 minutes of use. Zilandra's light rifle needed constant recalibration and would lose coherence in the presence of certain electromagnetic fields. Every weapon had drawbacks. Some required rare materials that could only be found on specific planets. Others needed specialized maintenance that could only be performed by trained technicians. A few were so complex that they would break down under battlefield conditions. Jake began to understand that sophistication came with costs. These weapons were incredibly powerful, but they were also incredibly fragile. They worked perfectly under controlled conditions but might fail when conditions became unpredictable. When Commander Vexithara finally called his name, Jake walked to the platform with a different perspective on what he had created. His weapons might be crude, but they were also simple and reliable. They would work in any environment, required no power source, and could be repaired with basic tools. Jake held up his shield and spiked weapon for everyone to see. The room fell silent as his classmates tried to understand what they were looking at. Jake stood on the platform holding his creations while 36 alien cadets stared at him in confusion. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Commander Vexithara spoke. "Cadet Morrison," she said, her crystalline voice carrying a note of concern. "Please explain what you have built." Jake lifted the shield-like piece in his left hand. "This is a defensive barrier designed for close-quarters combat," he said. "It can stop energy weapons, projectiles, and melee attacks, while providing offensive capabilities through its reinforced edges." Karthek made a sound that might have been laughter. "That is furniture debris," the Raptoid said. You have broken Academy property and called it a weapon. Other cadets murmured agreement. Jake could see doubt in Commander Vexithera's crystal features. She had expected him to fail, but not like this. The assignment was to build a weapon, Zilandra said, her light body flickering with what might have been amusement. Defensive equipment does not qualify as a weapon by any accepted military definition. Jake had expected this reaction. May I demonstrate? He asked. Commander Vexithera nodded, though she looked like she was regretting her decision to give humans a chance in the academy. Jake moved to the testing area and positioned himself in front of the metal plate targets. He held the shield in a comfortable grip and showed how the jagged edges could be used to catch incoming attacks. Human military doctrine has always recognized that defense and offense are not separate concepts, Jake explained. The best defensive tool is one that can also be used to attack. He swung the shield at the nearest metal plate. The reinforced edge cut through the metal like it was paper. The weight and momentum of the shield drove the sharp points deep into the target, leaving gouges that would have been lethal wounds on a living enemy. A few cadets sat up straighter. This was more interesting than they had expected. Jake stepped back and raised the spiked weapon in his right hand. This is designed for close-range combat in situations where traditional weapons might be ineffective. He twisted his wrist and the metal petals spread into their defensive configuration. Then he folded them back into a single sharp point. The weapon could adapt to whatever situation he faced without requiring any external power or complex mechanisms. Impressive, Veltar said, his musical voice carrying genuine interest. But how effective can primitive weapons be against advanced technology? Jake smiled. He had hoped someone would ask that question. Commander, Jake said, would it be possible to test these against some of the weapons my classmates have built, Commander? Vexithara's crystal features showed surprise. You wish to demonstrate combat effectiveness against advanced weapons? Yes, ma'am. The commander considered for a moment, then nodded. Cadet Zilandra, would you be willing to participate in a demonstration? Zilandra floated forward with her light rifle. I will use minimum power settings, she said. We do not want to actually harm the human. Jake positioned himself about 20 feet away from Zilandra and raised his shield. Ready when you are. Zilandra activated her weapon and fired a low-power beam at Jake's position. The coherent light struck the shield and scattered in all directions. The metal surface had been scarred and roughened during its violent creation, which meant it didn't provide a clean reflection point for the energy beam. Instead of punching through or burning through, the light spread across the shield's surface and dissipated harmlessly. Jake was protected, and Zilandra's weapon had been completely neutralized. The room erupted in surprised voices. Several cadets demanded to see the demonstration repeated. Commander Vexithera looked genuinely shocked. The surface irregularities created during construction cause energy dispersion, Jake explained. Most advanced weapons are designed to work against smooth, regular surfaces. Crude construction actually provides better protection than sophisticated engineering in many cases. Karthek stepped forward with his gravity hammer. Try that against kinetic force, he challenged. Jake nodded and braced himself. Karthek activated his weapon at its lowest setting and swung it toward Jake's shield. The gravity field struck the metal barrier and something unexpected happened. The shield absorbed the gravitational effect and distributed it across its entire irregular surface. Instead of being crushed or compressed, the metal flexed and bent in ways that dissipated the force. Jake was pushed backward, but remained standing and unharmed. More importantly, the shield had caught and held onto some of the gravity field effect. When Jake swung the shield in response, it carried enhanced kinetic energy that would have been devastating in real combat. The human has created something that turns our own weapons against us, Nixara observed, her swarm buzzing with agitation. Jake demonstrated several more defensive techniques, showing how his crude weapons could neutralize or redirect the sophisticated attacks his classmates had developed. Each test revealed new advantages to his seemingly primitive approach. But this is impossible, Veltar said, his crystal formations resonating with confusion. Advanced technology should always defeat primitive tools. Not always, Commander Vexithara said quietly. All eyes turned to her as she stepped onto the platform next to Jake. I have seen this before, though not in many centuries. She looked at Jake's weapons with new understanding. There is a principle in military science called the complexity paradox. The more sophisticated a weapon becomes, the more ways it can fail or be countered. Simple weapons have fewer vulnerabilities. The commander picked up Jake's shield and examined its construction. This was not built using established engineering principles. It was created through controlled destruction, which gave it properties that cannot be achieved through normal manufacturing. She set the shield down and faced the class. Cadet Morrison has demonstrated something that his species learned long ago. Sometimes the most effective weapon is not the most advanced weapon. Sometimes survival depends on tools that can function when everything else fails. Jake felt a surge of pride, but the commander wasn't finished. However, she continued, the real innovation here is not the weapons themselves. It is the tactical philosophy behind them. Cadet Morrison built weapons designed to keep him alive while he closes distance with his enemy. Most species build weapons designed to kill from a safe distance. She gestured to Jake's creations. These weapons assume that the fight will be close, personal, and brutal. They assume that defense and offense will happen simultaneously. Most importantly, they assume that the user's survival is more important than the enemy's destruction. Commander Vexathera looked around the room at all the advanced alien weapons. Every weapon demonstrated today is designed to win battles quickly and efficiently. Only one weapon is designed to make sure its user lives to fight another day. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. Jake's classmates had built weapons for winning wars. Jake had built weapons for surviving them. Cadet Morrison receives the highest marks for tactical innovation, Commander Vexathera announced. Not because his weapons are the most powerful, but because they represent a fundamental understanding of what combat actually requires. She paused and looked directly at Jake. The best weapon is not the one that kills your enemy fastest. The best weapon is the one that makes sure you are still alive when the fighting is over. Years later, when Jake had become a senior instructor at the academy, students would ask him about the day he shattered a desk and called it a shield. He would tell them that the real lesson wasn't about building weapons from furniture. The real lesson was about understanding that in war, victory doesn't always go to the side with the best technology. Sometimes victory goes to the side that refuses to give up, no matter how primitive their tools might seem. And sometimes, the most advanced thing you can do is remember that simple solutions often work better than complex ones when your life is on the line.